It is my honor to introduce Father Joe Healey as the guest speaker. Father is a Maryknoll priest who has been a missionary living in East Africa since 1968, over 50 years. He has relatives in New Jersey, including a brother and a sister who live in Harding Township, and a number of other relatives who live in the Summit area. Father, his emphasis has been on the formation of Christian communities in East Africa. And also, he has a deep knowledge of African proverbs, customs, and the culture. And I'm honored to introduce Father Joe Healey. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Joe Healey, and I'm a student. I'm a learner. As I travel around the world, I always begin the same way. I'm a student. I'm a learner. And already before our gathering today, I've learned a lot from yourselves in informal conversation. And I'm delighted to be here with you in person as well as on Zoom, and I greet all our Zoomites. Last year when I was invited, I said, maybe we could wait this year when the COVID cooled down. And I'm also walking in the footsteps of a friend of yours, Sister Magdalena, the Tanzanian sister who's spoken to you before, who's presently doing her field research for her doctorate at Seton Hall University. I'd like to begin by referring to my New Jersey connections, of which there are many. My father worked in Red Bank, New Jersey in a family business. And then when I was 2 years old, we moved to Baltimore, Maryland, where I grew up. And presently, I live with my brother, who's 4 years younger than I am, in New Vernon, New Jersey. In Nairobi, I lived with a wonderful Maryknoll priest from Clifton, New Jersey, Patterson Diocese. And he was a rabid New York Giant football fan. And he tried to convert me for many years. And I've held out all these years. I still root for the Baltimore Ravens. And he calls me a carpetbagger here in New Jersey. I went to Princeton University and I had a great exchange with Paul. I'm class of 1960 and stay connected to the university and all its academic values. And then I have relatives scattered all over New Jersey, including some here in New Providence. So when I left Nairobi, I asked a Kenyan friend of mine, when I get to America, what should I tell the American people? He said, you tell them, you Westerners have the watches, but we Africans have the time. And that's surely it. Time doesn't matter in Africa. For those of you who've been there, by the way, just to raise hands, how many people have traveled in Africa somewhere? I talked to, wow, 10, over 10, terrific. Well, it might have been frustrating at points, but you discovered how African time works slowly. Now, from one angle, we can use the stereotype and say that Africa is a basket case. War, poverty, sickness, all the bad things going on. But and we even call it sometimes the dark continent. But from another angle, it is a wonderful place of friendship, hospitality, welcome, and a spirit of sharing together. One of the big companies, I think it was the Rockefeller Foundation, did a survey of 20 to 30 countries around the world and asked, what are the happiest people in the world? Well, number one on the list were Nigeria. And when they asked the Nigerians, they said, we're not worried about succeeding. That's not our top priority. We're not worried about making a lot of money or building a lot of buildings. We're interested in people, in relationships, in togetherness. And that's why they came out as the happiest people in the world. Now, I went to an African leader and said, in one word, give me the key to the African culture, to the African experience. And immediately he said, participation. That's the key. Everyone participates. Now, we're going to start by you participating too, not just sit back and relax and listen, but I want you to join in. Now, my first question, and there's no Googling, by the way. Do not try to use your smartphone to get the answer. I'm going to ask now, just in a second, not quite now, but how many countries are there in Africa? Could we have a guess? Yes? 53. Another? 53. Another answer? 54. Another answer? Okay. Now, it's interesting. The African way of community is when someone gets the answer right, we clap for them. We clap for the man who said 54. Could we have the map of Africa, please? I have a map of Africa here.
Excuse me, not yet. I said members of the United Nations.
Now, our friend has an insight. When Daniel Moy was on a tour of Africa, and then he went up to Europe, he was the president of Kenya. They asked him, how many countries are there in Africa? He said, I don't know. I don't know. He said they're 53, 54, or 55, or 56. He doesn't know. Now there's the map of Africa. And just as an example, I'm here in Kenya. I'm here in Kenya. And that's East Africa. North of Kenya, you can see on the map, is Somalia. Well, the people in northern Somalia have started their own country. It's called Somaliland. Well, is it recognized by the UN yet? No, but it's in process. Also, in the Spanish Sahara, there's another country booming. So we really don't know. So all the answers you've given are really right. The point is, there are many, many countries in Africa. Each has their own identity and their own style. So how many languages are there in Africa? Can someone guess to that? Yes? Hundreds. Okay, somebody else? 500, somebody else? 3,000. 3,000 languages. I lived in Tanzania for 20 years. That's it. Okay, our man is way ahead of me with the hand there for Tanzania. 132 languages in Tanzania. In Kenya, where I'm living now, there's 71 languages. So there's a lot of variety, a lot of different dialects. I visited once Moshi, Tanzania, which is on the foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro, and they took me to a river. And they said, on this side of the river, we speak this language, but on the other side of the river, they speak another language, a dialect of Chaga. So just for fun, could you name one thing you know about Kenya? When you hear the word Kenya, what strikes you? What strikes you? Yes. Okay. Okay.
Minerals.
Okay, all good answer. Yes, one more? One more? Okay, now all your answers were good, but the first answer was the best, the long distance runners. In New York, there was a survey, who do you know best? What person in Kenya? They didn't know who the president was, but they knew the marathon runners because both men and women win the New York Marathon and the Boston Marathon. Sometimes they come 1, 2, 3. And they all come from the same part of Kenya, where there are hills and where they learn to run in a certain stride. And then they eat barley, which seems to be the favorite food for long distance runners. Now I went to Africa, as Jim said, in 1968. I had a vocation to the priesthood when I was in high school. I went to Portsmouth Abbey School in Rhode Island, a boarding school. And the Benedictines who ran the school are well known for liturgy and singing. The first day, I am not a singer, but I went to the Glee Club tryouts. Everyone had to try out. We had an Austrian maestro who was in charge of the choir. So you walked into the hall, he was at the piano, he played the do, re, mi, the scales, and asked you to repeat it. I murdered the scales. And he said, pointing to the door, out, out, out. So that was the end of my singing career. And I said, I'm not going to fake it all my life and join the Benedictines. So instead, I joined Marino, a missionary society. I grew up in Baltimore, and I liked the Black Americans in Baltimore. They were my friends. And in fact, I liked the Brooklyn Dodgers and their great Black athletes, if you remember very closely. So I said, when they asked me, where do you want to go? I said, Africa. And that was it. I went to Africa. Now, I teach now in the university in Nairobi, and I'm 84 years old. And when I went into the class the first day, they said, welcome, Mzee. Now, that's a title of respect for an older person. Maybe you remember Lion King, where the elder lion, the father lion, is called Mzee, which means elder. I said, no, no, not yet, not yet. Give me another name, another name. So the next day they came into class and they said, Padre, we have a new name for you. We're going to call you the youth from a long time ago. Now, when I went to Africa, I wanted to connect with young people. I wanted to be on their wavelength. And I knew there were two ways to do it, sports and music. Well, with music, total failure. All the rap, reggae, and different styles of music from Democratic Republic of the Congo or South Africa, I couldn't keep up with any of that. So I gave up on the music. But on sports, I worked it out. I discovered that the young people in Kenya like best the soccer matches in the English Premier League. And their favorite teams are Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal. So I memorized the names of all the players on those teams. And so well, they said, this old man, he knows what he's doing. Now, I'm very spontaneous. I have heroes. Now, this is not in my talk, but since you're going to do something about Aaron Judge, I'm a Baltimore Oriole fan. I've rooted against the Yankees all my life, but I love Aaron Judge. I love him because he's a simple and humble person, and he's a wonderful role model. So I hope he breaks the 61 home run. Now, a lot of you maybe were watching the Queen's funeral and all the proceedings. David Beckham, who was the best soccer player in England for 10 years, he got in line and he waited 10 hours going through the line. He could have got to the front of the line as a celebrity VIP, but he said, no, I want to walk with the people. That's inspiring to me. Sports. So several of you asked questions before, and I said I'd try to answer them. We used to go out to Africa and come back after 3 years. And of course, adjusting to the United States was hard. Then later on, we came back to Africa, back to the States every year. And someone asked me, when you come to America now, how long does it take you to adjust to American life? I answer 30 seconds because of internet. By the way, in the family, they call me the Zoom priest because, and my motto is go digital or die. And as I said to Jim before, I make mistakes on the internet every day. And we have a saying, information technology is great until you try to use it. So anyway, I'm on internet all the time. I've called on WhatsApp Africa already this morning. So with this digital world, the communication is different. I went out as a trained journalist. I went to the University of Missouri to get a master's in journalism and start the communications office. So I was a communicator. Not anymore. My new name is networker. That's the world of the digital world. Now, several ask about politics. And you remember we had a recent election in Kenya, and the New York Times said it best. Multi-party democracy in Africa is messy and unpredictable. That's perfect. That's the way it is. We used to have dictators. And I met one friend who worked in Libya. Wow, I don't think I could work in Libya. That'd be too much for me. But anyway, we now have multi-party democracy, and we have 5-year term limits for the president. He can return once, but after 10 years, he's out. And so we've done that 3 times. We've had an orderly transition to a new president. And this time the vote was very close. It went to the Supreme Court. Where have you heard that story before? And the 7 judges all said it was a valid election because the president doesn't appoint the justices. The parliament has to give approval. So we knew that it was a just election. So the other interesting thing people asked me was, what about Queen Elizabeth? Well, you must know the story by now. It's been on television 100 times. When she was a young woman in 1952, 70 years ago, she was in Kenya when her father, King George, died. She was at a game lodge. Several of you raised your hands and said you'd gone to some of the game lodges. She was at a place called Treetops with Prince Philip. And there she was, young 25-year-old woman, and she's told, you're now Queen of England. So we have a warm spot in our heart for her, as the whole world. Also, as a Commonwealth country, there are ties between Kenya and Great Britain. Now, my next question, you're going to say is a curveball, but this is the question. What are the 2 biggest diseases in Kenya? Now, they're not medical diseases. That's why you might say it's kind of a think outside the box question. They're not medical. It's not cancer or heart condition or AIDS. But what do you think are the 2 biggest diseases in Kenya? Yes.
Corruption.
Okay. And the other one? Okay. The other one is tribalism. Those 2 together, and they feed off each other, are the biggest challenges we have. Our economy would be booming, booming, booming if we didn't have tribalism and corruption. Now, we dropped the word tribalism in some forms, and the different tribes are now called ethnic groups. But endlessly, you favor your own. You favor your own. And there was a book that came out on Kenyan politics. It's Our Time to Eat. That's the title. It's our time to eat. Meaning, when you get in power, then you reward your relatives with jobs, you get government contracts with discounts, and you feed yourself. It's our time to eat. So how do we break down the tribalism? we had a very close election recently, and the two biggest ethnic groups, the Kikuyu and the Luo, were fighting for power. Well, one of the women in the small community that I belong to, at the end of the election, she stood up and said, I am a Christian first, a Kenyan second, and a Gikuyu third. So those were her priorities. She put her tribal affiliation third. Now, the minute I say tribalism, you're going to think of the Rwandan Genocide in 1994. And it was terrible. Between 800,000 and 1 million people were killed, butchered, murdered, assassinated in the fight between the Hutus and the Tutsis. In one area, a Hutu woman married a Tutsi man. And during the genocide, a gang came to their house and in front of the woman killed, murdered with a machete, a knife, just sliced and killed her husband. After the war was over and they began the different investigations, they wanted her to identify her husband's killer. And she said, no, I refuse to identify my husband's killer. If I identify him, he will be killed. And the cycle of violence will continue. I say, no, we need peace now. Daily African life is really what I think I'd like to share a bit with you. And at this point, the deepest African values can be seen as personal relationships, community, and unity. And I ask if we could have the slide on the African proverbs and sayings, please. A lot of my work is research and writing on African culture. And in particular, I like African proverbs. And this is the African proverbs page. If we could scroll up, okay, fine. Now, here you have, it's a poll of what is your favorite African proverb on journeying together. These are the choices. If you could go back to, okay, fine. This is fine. Okay. Now, you see there the different choices. My favorite proverb of the month on journeying together. And the first one says, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. It's both an Ethiopian proverb and one from Burkina Faso. Who has heard that proverb before? If you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. Anyone heard that proverb? Do you remember where you heard it? Anybody else? Okay. Where you heard it, Senator Booker, in his first campaign for the Senate, used that proverb. He said, togetherness is the theme of my campaign, and so we're going to use this African proverb. Another one that's very popular says, I am because we are. We are because I am. So to get into African culture, proverbs, sayings, and stories are very good. And the Africans want togetherness. They want to walk together. So we have another proverb. Unity is strength. Division is weakness. So community is not just an option, but it's a way of life with the African people. And what's very interesting to me, if any of you have seen sports in Africa, finishing together is what they like. So if they have a 100-yard dash, if 4 of them cross the line together, that's better than one being in front and the other three behind, because they've done it together. Now, I have a little demonstration. I'm going to ask for 5 volunteers, please, to stand up front, in front of the table with the Africana. Could I have 5 volunteers, please? I want to see your name. You are, yeah, okay, 5, okay, good. So we have 4 in the line face me and 1 line face me. Okay. Now, walk slowly toward me. Walk slowly toward me. Slowly, slowly, slowly. Who's first? Who's first? No, Ken. Who's walking in a line? Let's try again. Let's do it again. Okay, we're walking in a line. 4 people. Just walk toward me. Okay, who's first? And who's last? Okay, now turn around and walk on me, please. Who's first? And who's last? Stand in a circle and hold hands. Who's first? Nobody. Who's last? Nobody. Community. That's the meaning of community. We're together. Let's have a clap for our volunteers. So I suggest then that community is a way of life, a way of life. Many years ago, when I was a young priest living in Tanzania, I lived with 3 schoolboys. And these were all young men who were close friends of the bishop, and we lived in the same house. Thomas, John, and Paul. So one day I asked them, if you have $100, what would you buy? Thomas thought for a while and said, I would buy a bicycle. Then I would travel around the village and meet all my friends. Then I asked the second fellow, and he said, I would buy a transistor radio, and I would listen to all the soccer matches on the radio. And then I turned to the third boy, Paul, and said, what would you buy? And he thought for a long time, and then he said, I would buy a cow, and I would feed that cow, and she would get big and fat. And then I would go off and sell her for $200 and buy a bicycle and a transistor radio. So even in socialistic Tanzania, we have budding capitalists. Someone was asking about food. Now, it's very interesting. Of the folks that have been to Africa, there's a famous restaurant in Nairobi called Carnivore. Anyone go there? Anyway, it has all kinds of wild meat, antelope and venison and others. But my favorite is crocodile. Now you might say, oh, that sounds terrible, but it's like chicken. It's a delicious food, crocodile. But the most common staples in Africa depend on the country. Remember those 54 or whatever countries we have. In West Africa, yams is the most popular. In East Africa, it's a cooked maize meal, something like we have grits here, but then you let it cook a little until it hardens, or bananas, but these are unsweetened bananas that then are prepared like mashed potatoes. So those are the staples. And my favorite actually is these mashed bananas with peanut sauce. But the key, I think, for the food is not just the eating itself, but the experience of being together. There's a proverb, relationship is in the eating together, that we have a chance to be together. Could we have the small Christian community website? So community is important. Another proverb says, and this is my small Christian community website, in which I try to share how community living is so basic, but it's got parts of the whole world that are linked together. But the proverb says, there's always room for one more at the table. If someone unexpectedly comes, they're welcomed in. Welcome and hospitality is so very, very important. Now, daily African life, I can't pass by without mentioning there's another side, poverty. We talk about climate control, climate change, and we know flooding and drought are huge. We all read and listen to the news. Puerto Rico, the whole country is without power right now. Bangladesh and Pakistan, 40% of the country is under water right now. So if we talk about economic development, it's hard with these natural disasters. And look at ourselves, look at ourselves. We constantly have to bounce back with Hurricane Katrina, with the fires in California, bouncing back from natural disasters. Well, that's the life of Africa. We're always bouncing back from natural disasters. On economics, since some of you are in the field of finance, Kenya has a very, very fast growing economy. And if it wasn't for corruption and tribalism, it'd be one of the leaders of the world. Now, this is the fun part to me. As I've lived in Africa for all these years, when I first came to Africa, the major export crops that brought in the most income for the country were coffee, tea, cotton, and sugar. And I heard a radio program once that began, the next time you are traveling on a plane and the stewardess comes up to you and purrs in that nice voice the stewardesses have, coffee or tea, your answer affects millions of people around the world. And I think you all know much better than me the economics. The coffee board for the world is in London. They set the prices. So, but coffee or tea is very important. Now, later on, a new income came in, which is flowers, horticulture. I don't know if you realize that every day from Nairobi, a 747 filled only with flowers flies into JFK and distributes flowers all over America. The same thing flying from Nairobi to Amsterdam, which is the center for Europe for flowers. It's a huge income rate. The newest boom is with tourism, which of course the COVID knocked out, but tourism became very, very popular. And some of you have been on those safari tours or on photographic tours also, which are very good. We have now a new income raiser, and Steve helped me before. The word is income remittance. Where is money coming from now? Kenyans living in America, sending their money back to their relatives and friends in Kenya. That's the #1 earner of money for the Kenyan government, income remittances. Now, I'm going to get passionate. I like the word passionate. I'm passionate about fair trade goods. How many people here have heard of fair trade goods? Okay. Oh, hey, let's have a clap for them. Over half. Wow. I'm talking to the choir then. I'm passionate about fair trade goods because they give a fair, equitable amount of money to the growers of the coffee or tea or chocolate. Half the chocolate in the world comes from one country, Ghana, and they call it divine chocolate. Years ago, I went around to all the schools where my nieces and nephews studied. I went to Oak Knoll School in Summit, and I gave a passionate talk to the lower school about fair trade goods. And I said, go home tonight and tell your mother to buy fair trade coffee, to buy fair trade tea. So that night, a woman called me on the phone and said, wow, Father, you really excited those children. They've been saying to me, Mommy, when are you going to buy fair trade goods? So those children were good ambassadors. But it's a simple way of helping what we call the third world. I'm a troublemaker. That's one of my favorite names. I don't like the old language. Developing countries, that's pejorative. Third world, that's pejorative. So we now call it Global South, that whole belt of Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Help them through fair trade goods. Now, what's exciting about Kenya are natural resources. Solar energy is huge in northern Kenya. We have a lot of minerals that we haven't even discovered that are used in cell phones, for example. So there's a budding economy. The Chinese have come into Kenya and they have built car factories. So we buy our own cars, Chinese cars made and assembled in Kenya. So that's why Kenya is really growing very fast. Now, I'm coming to the close. I'm 84 years old. I keep telling people it's time, like the old horse, to let me out to pasture and retire. But I'm now full-time in internet ministry, and I'm talking with Kenya every day, and they're talking with me. Now I'd like to leave you with some takeaways. That's my favorite way of closing a talk. One is, together with Jim and with Tony, we're going to set up some African fairs. Actually, it was Sister Magdalena who came up with the idea. So in Summit and some of these other cities here in New Jersey, we're going to have African fairs where we can buy those African shirts like I'm wearing, or belts, or other African accessories. Also, we have some books that I've written on Africa, and they're all available on Amazon. They're from the Orbis company in New York, run by Mary Knoll. But one of them is called Once Upon a Time in Africa, Stories of Wisdom and Joy. And just to tell you one story from the book. When the sun rises on the Serengeti, the slowest antelope knows that it must run faster than the lion or it will be killed. The lion wakes up and knows it must run faster than the slowest antelope or it will not get any food that day. The motto is, when the sun gets up, you better be running. Now, I told that story in New York City once, and a woman raised her hand and said, Father, that's not an African story, that's New York City. When I got up in the morning, I got to be running. So those are some of the books that I have. I'm going to end on a note that is very important. I have welcomed visitors like yourself to Africa for 50 years. Every one of them at the end of the trip says the same thing. The poverty is endless here. The poverty is endless. And then they say, how can the people be so joyful? Even with poverty and with these disasters, the people are happy. They are joyful. So the first president of Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, said, in Africa, we have many problems, but we remain cheerful. Thank you. So like the man who said, we Africans have the time, I don't know how long that was, but let's go for questions for wherever it takes us. The first question?
I'll just say it from here, it's short. You can repeat it. Tell us your opinion about the British colonization of much of Africa, including Kenya and the benefits of colonization.
Okay. A good question, and it's been in the news the last 2 weeks. Tell us about British colonization and its effects on Kenya. I think that all of our European powers made mistakes when they colonized Africa. I think the British did better than the French, who were in West Africa, the Belgians, who were in Belgian Congo, which is now Democratic Republic of the Congo. Look what happened to Rwanda. That was a Belgian colony. I think that Britain tried hard to introduce a system of, orderly system of government. Now, I'm the wrong person to answer that question. The day after the Queen died, there were all these praises of Queen Elizabeth, but one African woman here in Kenya got in the New York Times and said she was an evil woman because she promoted colonialism. I can't speak to that. That's that woman's views, a Kenyan woman. But to her, the system was the problem, not the woman. They loved Queen Elizabeth, but the system kept the people down and kept them second class. I think they're equal now, but it was a long struggle. And the first president of Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta, he went to prison. He was put in prison by the English government. Same thing in Uganda, same thing in Tanzania. So we made a lot of mistakes in the first generation, but I'd say there's a good harmonious relationship. And I'm saying I'm embarrassed myself because with colonialism came the missionaries and we made a lot of mistakes and we treated the people and their culture second class in the early days, in the 40s, in the 50s. That's changed. But we should be apologetic and ask for forgiveness for some of the things we did.
From Zoom, Mitch?
Yeah, thank you so much, Father. You went to Kenya 50 years ago first?
Yeah.
Okay. When you went there, how many languages did you speak? And of course, the real question is, how many do you speak now?
Well, I begin by saying, when I'm hungry, I can speak any language. All you got to do is this. Okay, now I went out knowing only English, and I learned Swahili, which is the local dialect for all of Eastern Africa. About 100 million people speak Swahili. I've learned a lot of the greetings and a lot of the easy relationship words in about 10 languages, but I don't speak any of those fluently. But I know when I try to use the language of the local people, they love it. They say, this foreigner is trying to share with us. And so it's not so much being good in the language, it's trying. That's the key thing. Now, since someone else asked me this, I know this surprises people. They say, when you went out 50 years ago and now, how many changes have you seen? And I always answer in an unusual way, very few. The corruption is just as bad as it was 50 years ago. The tribalism is just as bad. So those the systemic problems still exist. A lot of development, big cities and education and healthcare, but still some of those basic problems of inequality we have not been able to overcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Father Joe, I have a question on the Commonwealth. Do you see it growing? Is it a kind of like an EC in development? I heard this week an interview with the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, and she said some of the non-British former colonies like Gabon, Cameroon, are actually joining it. You want to comment on the Commonwealth?
Okay, I'm not an expert. Maybe some of you have a better answer than I do. There are presently 14 countries, that still accept the king or queen as their head. And already we've seen 3 examples of them saying that they're going to have a referendum in the next couple of years, because it no longer fits to have, for example, a king living in England being, the head of a government in the Caribbean, as an example. But what is growing is the economic commonwealth. That's the key. The future is for the economic. And I think the idea of unity is strength, division is weakness. When we work together, we can save money and we can serve each other better. One of the craziest things that I ever discovered when I went to Africa was several different railroad companies from Europe had built railroads in Africa, in Kenya, and the gauge was different. Well, that has to change. That has to change. There has to be uniformity and those kind of things. In the internet, I think there's a lot of rules now which save people money. So I think the economic commonwealth will grow, and I think the political or the monarchical will fade out slowly.
We have a question on the chat box. In your religious endeavor, did you find much resistance or opposition from the Muslim communities?
That's very interesting, because I've worked with what is called interreligious dialogue. That's the term, or interfaith dialogue. I work mainly with Sunni Muslims. And I think if anyone has studied it, it's complicated how after Muhammad died, they split. And the Sunnis and the Shiites are like enemies to each other and are fighting wars. So they can't even agree. But what I find in a typical country like Kenya or Tanzania, 98% of the Muslims want peace, and they want to live together with their Christian or Jewish communities. 2 of them are rabble-rousers, those imams who on Friday stir up and have protests and all that. So I'm hopeful for the interreligious dialogue in the sense that there's so many things we could work together on. Healthcare, for example, that is known and important to everyone. So children is important to everyone. So in the case of the dialogue, I accentuate the positive rather than the negative.
But I'm an engineer. You spoke so much about the togetherness in Africa.
About the,
Togetherness.
With togetherness.
oh, together, yeah.
But at the same time, you spoke about the tribalism and the people killing each other. How can you reconcile these 2 things?
Okay. These are all answers that other people have helped me. Community is an ambiguous charism. That's what I call it, an ambiguous charism. There is strong identity with ethnic groups, tribes. There's a saying, and this is in the Christian tradition, where you baptize the children using water, that they say, the blood of tribalism is stronger than the water of Christianity, meaning the blood ties of a people are stronger than their Christian ties. And we saw that in Rwanda, where Christians killed each other from the different ethnic groups. They just went on a passion tirade to raid neighboring homes. So you see all that negative side of community, the divisiveness, the competitiveness. And then you see the bright side, which someone said he'd been in South Africa. Ubuntu is the philosophy of South Africa on togetherness and oneness. So it's both and. It's both and. And human nature being it is. Time magazine cover on Rwanda said, hell on earth. That was the tribalism, hell on earth. And yet we have so many wonderful examples of people sharing and working together. So it's both and.
Bill Tittle, remotely.
Right. Come on. Am I unmuted?
We hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I have an observation, Father, and also a question. The church I attend has a sister church in Zambia, and some of those folks came over. I've never been to Africa, and I was so struck. These people are poor as church mice, but their joy and their, I don't know, and it was so striking how happy they were, how contented they were, how glad they were to see us, and everything. It was very striking. So here's my question. I hope it's not too personal, and I hope I didn't miss it. So you said you started out to be a journalist. How did you end up deciding to go into the priesthood?
Well, the priesthood came first. I got the call, if you want to use that word, when I was in high school, that I wanted to become a priest. And although I like many priests in America, I never was drawn to what is called the diocesan priesthood, to work in Newark Archdiocese or Patterson Diocese. I wanted to be a missionary from the very beginning. That was my dream. And so I was able to fulfill that dream in going to Africa. So it was early on vocation, but right now I would say I'm a missioner first and a priest second. That would be the way I feel it. Now, I want to come back to your early statement. What you describe about those people from Zambia, we have different words for that. Twinning or partnerships, where a church in Africa would come here and in turn we would send a delegation to Africa. It's amazing, the bonding that takes place, the bonding. And the Africans, for them, it's the relationship, not the size of the church or not all the projects, it's the relationship. The mistake young people in the Peace Corps make going to Africa, they go out there to change the people, to have a health project of water, for example, or a school project. That's not what works with the people. It's relationships. It's the personal side. It's the human friendships that develop. Now, I'm going to get in trouble now when I talk about men and women. But in the research that we've done of peace building in East Africa, we did it in South Sudan and in Rwanda. The men were less successful than the women. Why? The women stressed personal relationships. The men stressed power and control. It was clear. So we solved these problems on personal relationships much more than coming in strong with rules and regulations.
We don't admit women, so should we bring some in and we'll be more successful
On peacemaking,
on running an organization?
well, I can tell you, I would like everyone in this room to answer that question, because we have all sorts of theories about the glass ceiling, And I think I can't answer that because the Catholic Church has done so poorly. So poorly. I mean, the cardinals of the world, including Cardinal Tobin from Newark, were over there for a meeting with the Pope 2 weeks ago. There were 197 cardinals in the room, not one woman. Well, women are half the world. So I'm embarrassed to even talk about that question because we're the worst offenders, the Catholic Church. I'm sorry. By the way, I'm for women priests. Don't quote me now, the bishop.
I just have a quick observation. Father Joe, you and I were talking last week, and we were talking about several of these things, and we talked about tribalism. You mentioned how this is one of the big diseases over there, and people over there are trying to stop use the word tribalism. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to you, in the United States, it's become all the rage to use the word tribalism to describe what's happening in the United States, and for all the same bad reasons. And it seems to actually fit what's happening. It's ironic.
Yeah, that's it. And Shakespeare said it, the wheel has come full circle. That's how it happens.
Yes, Bobby sends on that.
Bob, you have to unmute.
Okay, this is the last question.
My son-in-law is a Kenyan, comes from Kikuyu area and very much in control of the politics of that country. And he said that the Chinese are doing tremendously good things in their country. But I feel the Chinese doing good things is in their own interest. But he seems to have different opinion. Can you reflect on the Chinese influence of in that country compared to the British influence in India before the independence?
Okay, I'll comment on that. I think the Chinese came in when there was a bit of a gap, when the American and European interests were not dominant. And they came in very practical ways. They built railroads, they built bridges, they built roads, and for sports fans, they built sports arenas, football, soccer pitches. So their projects were very successful. But what happened, the Chinese, when they came into Tanzania, for example, to build the railroad, they stayed among themselves. They had their own little commune of Chinese, and they didn't mix with the people. The people didn't understand that at all. They expected the Chinese to mix with them. So on a personal relationship side, it was not successful. The fight now is clearly for the natural minerals, for the natural resources. Now, I'm not an economist, but I blame, with respect, the American companies who pulled out of the mining in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo and let the Chinese come in. And now the Chinese are employing children 12 years old to go into those mines. That's unjust. And the UN peace force has been a failure in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. So I think this battle for the economy of Africa is going to go back and forth. And I think the debt now that like Kenya has to the Chinese government is so huge, so huge. But businessmen are coming from Middle East and they are taking over a lot of these businesses. So like Saudi Arabia, with all that oil money, they're coming in. They're building a whole new port in eastern Kenya. So the economics is a crucial factor. And I'd say it's uncertain where China will be in the next 10 years. Just before Steve gives the final word, I want to thank the team, Paul, Joel, and Steve. This is community. This is African togetherness, a perfect example of walking the walk, talking the talk all together. Thank you.
Father Healey, thank you so much for an incredibly personal and insightful talk. We have all learned a great deal this morning. And now Jim will provide our formal thank you.
This is a certificate of appreciation for your honoring us today. And it has a symbol of the orchid on the lower left-hand side. That's because when the Seminole Guard was founded in 1930, this was the orchid, Summit was the orchid capital of the East. So that's the significance of the orchid. And in addition to the certificate of appreciation, we also give you the Old Guard salute.